Japan. They're good at a lot of things. Technology, automobiles, heavy machinery, and of course, video games. Japanese companies led the resurgence of the video game industry after the crash of 1983, and changed home entertainment forever. But as Western markets grew, so too did the number of Western games. It wasn't long before Japan's dominance of the industry began to slip. Eastern game design didn't go away, far from it, but Western, let's say, flourishes were often present. Small, curated sets gave way to sprawling open worlds. Vibrant colors dulled into realistic browns and grays. And arguably, nuance went out the window in favor of Hollywood action. Japan has produced countless fantastic, memorable games in recent years, but there's always been debate over perceived westernization. Capcom are definitely not strangers to this sort of discourse, but dig deeper into the company's catalog, and it's clear that the unique spirit of Japanese game design lives on. For every Dead Rising 3 and Resident Evil 6, there's a Monster Hunter World, or an Okami, Ace Attorney, Beautiful Joe, or Steel Battalion. Games with concepts and execution so unique that if the series isn't still alive, there's surely a petition to bring it back once again. But you're probably thinking, this is a racing game video. Why haven't you mentioned racing games yet? Simple. Japan used to absolutely pump out racing games. Ridge Racer, Gran Turismo, Tokyo Extreme Racer, Initial D, everything Sega made between 1986 and 2010. Japan has made way too many racing games for me to ever hope to list all the ones worth playing. But Capcom's only made 2. Both were horrible commercial failures. Group S Challenge is a Gran Turismo clone with horrible AI, one of the few games on the Xbox that runs at less than 480p, and completely lacks online play. Which would all be fine. Except it came out a week before Project Gotham Racing 2, a system seller, with 0 of these issues. Modellista, is a much more memorable take on the racing game, one that actually predates Group S Challenge. Kind of. In the early 2000s, it became quite common for racers to aim for realism rather than a specific art style. Unfortunately, age has meant that these games all sort of blend together without a distinct visual identity. In sharp contrast, Modellista is incredibly unique and absolutely gorgeous. The art style is an absolute slam dunk, and the rest of the presentation is lovably quirky in ways that only a middle-market game from Japan can be. The car roster is big, the customization is relatively in-depth, and the announcer has snorted way too much coke.
Keep rockin', baby!
The game released in August of 2002, but only in Japan and only on the PlayStation 2. When you finally got to experience Modellista depended entirely on where you lived and which console you had. There was a PAL PS2 release in December of 2002, and Americans finally got their greasy little hands on the PS2 version that spring. Note the new cover art. Over the next year, the game made its way into other 2 major platforms, finally releasing on the Xbox in January of 2004. After the first American release on the PS2, all subsequent releases, regardless of region, had the Dodge Viper cover art. In Japan, this new version received a subtitle of US Tuned, and boasted new content including 2 new tracks and new cars from American manufacturers, plus improvements to menus, the replay system, and online play, including support for the then new Xbox Live. On paper, Modellista US Tuned is the definitive version of the game. But US Tuned has one additional change that isn't mentioned anywhere on the box art, even in Japan. See, initial reviews for Modellista were lukewarm at best. Critics loved the game's graphics and style, but felt it was far too easy. Cars were quick and handled directly, while AI posed little challenge. So what did Capcom do to remedy this for the North American release? Did they make the AI less stupid? Or maybe put some sort of progression system in place to stop players from jumping into the fastest cars from the start? Nope! They elected to completely change the handling model instead, nerfing the player's ability to turn with any sort of urgency, and giving all the cars the acceleration capabilities of a city bus. AI were left basically untouched, and the vast majority of races saw the computer opponents scampering off the line and into the distance, while the player manages 0 to 60 and eventually. Don't misunderstand me though. Modellista US Tuned is not a difficult game. As horrible as the handling is, it doesn't matter much when the game's tracks consist primarily of straightaways. The original version of Modellista featured only 6 tracks, 3 highway loops, 2 mountain passes, and 1 proper racetrack in the Suzuka circuit. So that's 4 out of 6 tracks that can largely be dominated by straight line speed. And what does Capcom do? Add 2 more ovals. Modellista US Tuned is an absolute comedy of errors. Capcom recognized that their game had promise, but needed some work if it was to succeed in the States. So they managed to do absolutely nothing about the game's problems of low difficulty and content variety, while introducing entirely new problems that didn't exist in the original release. Even with the additional content, Modellista is a very short game, and I've completed the US-tuned version quite a few times over the years. Until recently, I've never had a way to play the original PS2 version on real hardware, but now that I do, I want to set the story straight once and for all. The difference is immediately apparent. Driving in the Japanese version of Modellista feels like something you'd actually want to do, rather than something you tolerate for the sake of the visuals. The handling is not unrealistic or stupid easy. You actually have to brake and take proper limes more often than you do in US tuned. Cars are overall faster and more controllable, but I won't exaggerate and call this version exceptional. It is very par for the course when it comes to PS2 racers, though it does tend to feel a bit on the understeery side. That is fine for most of the tracks, but the mountain passes are a different story. It's abundantly clear that the handling model was built around the street circuits, and the winding roads of Mount Akagi and Rocco Hill are a bit too much for the driving model to handle. You are supposedly able to drift, but I've yet to work out how you're supposed to do that in either version of the game. The e-brake yields some hilariously undesirable results. To the best I can tell, it's the only way to break the rear end loose. Some issues I experienced in US tuned are surprisingly still present in version 1, such as cars running out of gear and bouncing off the limiter, eliciting an irritating beeping tone. For some reason, many cars top out at less than 200 km per hour, even when geared for top speed and with a tune that presumably removes the electronic limiter. This effectively makes a massive chunk of the game's cars completely unviable at higher levels. The Mazda RX-8 could go faster than this stock. Hell, there were factory models that could do 270k. What's the point of having upgrades available for the quirkier cars if they are literally unable to outrun the quote-unquote meta vehicles that should end up driving in every other Japanese racing game? Using a Nissan Skyline just completely evaporates any semblance of a challenge this game might have posed, and that's probably why it got the critical reception it did. It's a shame too, because this game offers a really beautiful rendition of some rare cars that never got much representation. In a game that is so unique and quirky, with so many cars to choose from, it feels like a bit of a betrayal to be essentially forced into driving an NSX, RX-7, or Skyline to be competitive in later stages. One genuine improvement US Tune makes over version 1 is an option to quick tune cars between races in a series. You can't back out and change cars or make specific changes, but you can adjust gear ratios and tires. This is actually quite important because the best tires for street circuits suck in the rain, and short gears are important for hill climbs but are a death sentence somewhere like Osaka Highway. The solution to this problem is unfortunately simple: use the Skyline. Earlier I said this game has later stages, and I think that's a bit misleading, as there are only 7 of them, featuring between 3 and 5 races each. Modellista is a 3 to 4 hour affair tops, and what's astounding about that is how even in such a short period of time it manages to feel repetitive. As much as I question the inclusion of oval tracks in US Tuned, I would have welcomed them with open arms after my 6th trip around East Tokyo. And why is there only one proper racetrack? Even within Japan, you have Motegi, Fuji, and Okayama, not to mention the literal dozens of iconic racetracks from around the world, many of which appear in basically any other PS2 racing game of this ilk. After completing both of these games, I've come to a conclusion. Modellista simply isn't very good, no matter which version you choose. The art style is bite the back of your hand beautiful, and the game's presentation oozes 2000s cool and Japanese quirk. But once the novelty wears off, you're left with a poorly executed racer with little in the way of content. Capcom clearly knew they had something worth saving, or else they wouldn't have authorized the team to dump money into licensing more cars, fixing the difficulty problem, and porting the game to 2 completely different systems. What frustrates me most about Modellista is that the devs got something that most developers wouldn't get until nearly a decade later: a chance to fix their mistakes after the game released. But rather than embracing their unique style and translating the gameplay to match, they focused on offering what they thought Americans wanted: quote-unquote realistic handling, oval tracks, and a Dodge Viper. But none of that is what Modellista really needed. Japan is good at niches. Well, after the rise of Western game design, Japan still produces absolute bangers year after year, simply by trying new things rather than putting out what they think the West wants. Games like Ace Combat, Nier Automata, and Persona are definitely not for everyone, especially in the West. But they all stand out as experiences that can't be wholly replaced by any other game. Modellista could have joined these ranks if Capcom had just realized that the solution to the game's problem was not to make it more realistic. It was to fully embrace the insane anime aesthetic the rest of the game was going for. If Modellista played like Ridge Racer and had more varied tracks instead of straight lines, it would be a lot better off. This is a game worth playing, and if you play the original version, it's even a game worth completing. But it hurts knowing that it could have been so much better, and for some reason, we've still never gotten another racer in this style. I have found myself acutely aware that basically every racing game released by a major publisher in the last few years is either an open-world street racing game or yet another take on realistic circuit racing. Games like this tried new things and filled a hole in the market that's been depressingly empty for over a decade. And I think that's why I found myself going back to games that are almost as old as I am, while leaving brand new racers basically untouched. I hope that one day we see games like Modellista make a comeback. And who knows, maybe someone can finish what Capcom started. I'd like to thank Acquire86, Adam Wozniewski, Andre N., Andrew Elmore, Ben M., Jesse Scales, Kai M., Caitlin Bowers, Kelly Craven, Mini-Me, Mr. W, Rachel, Racing Game Archive, Rabbit the Jaguar, Thibaut Renault, and Thunder THR. If you like what I do, Patreon is a great way to support the show. In times like these, every dollar really does count. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.